Okay, we are onto Warlock. I think Warlock is actually the most surprising class for most people in the entire set because Warlock got shafted. More so than Shaman. Warlock actually ended up being, after some nerfs, the worst standard class in the game. As of the recording of this video, it is the lowest win rate class by about 1% on HS Replay. Followed by Shaman and Mage, which are about the same, by like 0.2%. So, I was not that surprised. I don't know if it's in this review or the Outland review, but I basically said Warlock got shafted, and they really did. Especially in Outland, they got like no crazy cards in that expansion at all. So, let's get into it. Let's start with Demonic Studies. It is a 1 mana common spell. Discover a demon, and your next one costs 1 less. Demons costing 1 less isn't that big of a deal, as we've seen with things like Canrathad. Canrathad Ebonlock sees play, but he doesn't see play for his demon discount effect. He just mostly sees play because he's like efficiently statted and can summon big demons later in the game. It's also worth noting the demons as on average aren't that strong and still aren't that strong. There are a lot of demons in the game now, much more than there were before, but it's still probably not worth running a 1 mana Discover a demon card in your deck, even if it discounts your next one. Yeah, basically right on the money. Demonic Studies are currently hamstringed quite a bit by the extremely polluted demon pool from Ashes of Outland. And a lot of Warlock cards that were actually really potent and really strong have been hamstrung by the potency and the increase of demons in the pool. It turns out that Demonic Studies just typically doesn't give you a good card. The demon pool is just that bad, and Scholomance actually weakened the demon pool with a 0 mana 1/1. I do want to note though that I mentioned Canrathad Ebonlock there in that review, saying that he was not used for his demon discount. It's actually not the case. Canrathad Ebonlock started to see a lot of play in a new wild format deck with Darklair Warlock. Which I don't think anyone predicted. It took about a week for the deck to pick up in the wild format after the expansion was released. So, but yeah, that's like the only Warlock deck that saw any real competitive success. Some people managed to try out Quest Warlock with like an OTK and stuff like that. Did not catch on and was not super popular. Very much like an anti-off meta deck. Next up is Raise Dead, which we've talked about before. This is really good in Warlock. Giving resurrect effects to them is great, and dealing 3 damage to your hero is kind of relevant for things like Flash Giant, which we've also talked about before. I don't think Raise Dead will fit into too many decks right now. It doesn't fit into Quest Warlock, it doesn't fit into Galakron based decks, nor does it fit into Zoo, really. I mean, you could fit this in Zoo, but it's probably not that great there. I feel like you could just use this as like a self-damage card, right? For cards that care about that, but if you're just using it for that effect and not really giving a shit about the resurrect value, it kind of sucks. I feel like this is okay in Priest, and it's not that great here in Warlock. I don't think it fits into any current existing archetypes, and I don't think it'll see much play. Raise Dead, one of the best Warlock cards in the set, as it was played specifically for the self-damage effect, ironically. A 0 mana spell that dealt 3 damage to your hero during the peak of Darklair Warlock allowed you to gain 2 mana crystals essentially for nothing. And was a huge enabler for Darklair Zoo decks, I guess is how you would put them, because they ran a pretty traditional Zoo shell, mostly self-damaging cards, but they also ran Giants, Flesh Giant and Molten Giant specifically, with Broomsticks, with Darklairs, with Penflingers, all of which used were either to generate mana through the Darklair by pinging you in the face, or allowed you to play big Giants, and Raise Dead was a huge part of that deck. Not in Warlock anyway. Next is Soul Theologist and Militia. Again, if you are going to be running Soul Fragments, you're probably going to be running Militia in both Warlock and Demon Hunter. I think the Warlock Soul Fragment deck is going to be a little different though. I don't think it'll run every Soul Fragment payoff and generator, because I feel like you want to build it more like a Zoo deck. And Demon Hunter sort of fits the mid-range style of the deck way better than the Warlock cards do. And running it as a control deck might feel bad. Again, but if you are running the Soul Fragments, you probably are running Militia. She's quite a good card. So, I don't think Militia has ever been played in Warlock at all. And if she is, she's included in decks that are not very popular and not very great. Like, she's a strong card.
as evidenced by her presence in Demon Hunter. But I genuinely forgot this was also a Warlock card, because I have not seen Warlocks play this card. I think the reason for that mostly is because generating Soul Fragments in Warlock is a lot harder to do, because some of your payoffs aren't as good, and it's just a whole lot of problems with Militia and Warlock. If she does see play, I've not seen her very often, so take that how you will.
Soul Shear again, as we talked about with Demon Hunter, deal 3 damage to a minion is really efficient, especially with a delayed heal for 4 attached to it. It's just a straight up power creep on Dark Bomb. I mean, yeah, Dark Bomb could go face, but I mean, this doesn't matter that much when it heals you for 4. This is quite strong, and again, it's probably a good enough card you would run it in most of your Soul Fragment decks, especially with more of your Zoo type builds.
I think our Soul Shear is the best of the Warlock generators, and it's also a Demon Hunter card. Just to put it in perspective of how well Soul Fragments worked in Warlock. Part of the problem is because of this card as well. But it did see play. Soul Shear does see some play in Warlock with Militia, but it's not popular at all.
This is the only one that seems a bit sus to me. It's a 3 mana common spell, School Spirits, deal 2 damage to all minions and shuffle 2 Soul Fragments into your deck. So Zoo runs a lot of 2 health minions. You have things like Flame Imps, you have the sidekick, the beaming sidekick that buffs your health of your guys. You run things like that. Canrathat Ebonlock is a 2 health guy. You know, Zoo wants to control the early board, and School Spirits kind of hurts your early board control presence. Like, you might lose your own board playing School Spirits to shuffle 2 Soul Fragments into your deck. Is that great? Yeah, not really. If you're running a Soul Fragment deck with a Zoo shell, you probably aren't going to be running School Spirits in the deck, which means you're losing some of your generation, which does suck quite a bit. Maybe you do run this and you run more of a mid-range build and not Zoo, but I mean, Warlock is so good at running Zoo that maybe you just do it. And again, you just have the draw, so maybe you don't necessarily need to run all the generators, you just need to run a few, and you only play like your generator right into your payoff card, but again, you have cards like School Spirits here that seem kind of problematic for that game plan.
School Spirits definitely was problematic for that game plan, and does see some play in control decks with the Soul Fragment package, but not for the AoE, just to generate Soul Fragments. They have better AoE in the form of the Dragon, Crazed Netherwing, which is just straight up better, and in terms of Zoo, it hurts your own board way too much. Dealing 2 damage, as I said, like Canrathat Ebonlock, Flame Imps, you know, you're losing and giving up your early board control, just to generate some Soul Fragments in your deck, and it's just not worth it. Absolutely.
But then again, the payoffs are quite good. You have this 3 mana 3/4 Shadowlight Scholar rare. It's a battle cry. Destroy a strong Soul Fragment in your deck. Oh my god, I'm losing my mind. Destroy a Soul Fragment in your deck to deal 3 damage. You could deal it to any target. It can go over the top and hit face if you need it to, which is kind of nice. It kind of makes SI7 Agent and Scale Rider look like absolute garbage. But the caveat is the condition of both of those cards is much easier to pull off than this one is. On turn 3, if you can find a good target for this, it's great if you have the Soul Fragments in your deck. But again, to do that, you potentially need to run things like School Spirits, which could destroy your Flame Imps, destroy your Blazing Battle Mages, your Beaming Sidekicks, which you need for the early game aggression, and weaken your Void Callers. Like, not Void Callers, what are they fucking called? Void Walkers. So if you're running a Zoo build, which this card would seem to indicate because it's an efficiently statted 3-drop that deals 3 damage, like on a stick, you know, this does technically work in a control build, but if you're paying 3 mana for this, you probably want to have more going on in a control deck. This is not a great control card. It's an acceptable control card. Again, things like SI7 Agent, things like Scale Rider are great in more tempo or more aggro based decks, because they're efficiently statted and they can usually take a minion down with them, which is great efficiency.
So the thing with the Demon Hunter cards is that they all seem to work really well to a common game plan, right? Like, the weapon shuffles the fragments in, the lapidary uses them up. Both of those cards synergize really well together. You have the Soul Shear, and you have the Spirit Jailer, and what's your other generator in Demon Hunter? I can't remember what the other generator is. Is it a minion? I genuinely don't remember. What do they have? They have the board clear one, which is great in that deck because it allows you to come back from behind. Like, it's basically a Dustbreaker. Like, compare that to this, right? Same mana, same attack, 2 less health on the Demon Hunter one, but the difference is that the Battle Cry for the Demon Hunter one clears the board completely for the same amount of damage. This only does 3 damage to one target, and all you get is 2 extra health. Like, this card, not only does it go against, like, any sort of Warlock philosophy, considering how you would have to build your deck, it just doesn't, like, this is not good enough in control. And you're not running Zoo because you need to run School Spirits, and School Spirits kills your early board control. So Warlock just kind of had a weird identity crisis when it comes to its Soul Fragment cards. And I feel like they wanted to have this as like a Demon Hunter card, but then they didn't want to have double board clears in Warlock for this, right? Because that's like, they're cannibalizing each other in a sense, right? What's the other Demon Hunter generator? I actually don't remember. I know they have like more generators, right? They have the weapon to generate. They have Soul Shield. What's the other one? They've got to have 2, right? What's the other generator they have? Why can I not remember the other generator that they have in Demon Hunter? Is it a minion? That's gonna bother me for ages now. But yeah, Warlock just they're almost like, I don't know. There's such a conflicting design philosophy amongst the Soul Fragment cards, which really cannibalized them a lot, and just there were better options.
This can do that. But again, does the shell really need you to, like, can you really run anti-zoo kind of cards like School Spirits alongside Shadowlight Scholars? And I do think, like, is it just a situation where you don't run both? Where you don't run all of the payoffs, you don't run all of the generators, you only run the best ones for your shell? And then are you not just crippling yourself by forcing the Soul Fragment stuff when you're not, you know, fully committed to it?
I basically hit the nail right on the head there. Like, the thing is, there just isn't enough Soul Fragment generators and payoffs. Like, you can't run the payoffs without enough generators, and you can't run the generators without the payoffs, because the Soul Fragments themselves are not that great. They're not that useful to you. So, yeah, you have a situation in Warlock specifically where the cards you do have, you kind of have to run them if you want to use all of them, but that hurts your Zoo game plan, and it's not strong enough for control, so you're just crippling yourself most of the time.
Well, who's to say, because you have things like this. It's a 5 mana Voiddrinker at Epic. It's a 4/5. It's a demon with taunt. And a Battle Cry, destroy a soul fragment in your deck to gain +3/+3. So with soul fragments in your deck, that makes this an Earth Elemental. That's pretty good. But you need to have soul fragments in your deck, otherwise you're playing a pretty bad Rotten Apple Bomb. Would you want to play a really bad Rotten Apple Bomb? No, definitely not. Rotten Apple Bomb was hard to play at its mana cost and stats as it was. And the only reason why you did was because it effectively gained you 9 health. And as we've talked about, we've brought up Apple Bomb a few times in this card review. There are so many better alternatives to Apple Bomb, particularly Groundskeeper, I think it's called, which is just straight up better than this. Same stat line for 1 less mana with a better Battle Cry effect and taunt anyway. That being said, like Warlocks having access to an Earth Elemental that doesn't overload you if they can do it is really strong in Zoo. Like, if you can slam this on the board on turn 5, you basically have a huge minion that takes control of the board. And yeah, in some matchups it's just going to get deathed, but I mean, if they're deathing this on turn 5, then you might just kill them. I think that the Soul Fragment stuff is a lot weaker in Warlock than it is in Demon Hunter. So we'll see how that goes. Again, because I'm not convinced that you run all of the Soul Fragment stuff in Warlock together, even though I'm convinced you do it for Demon Hunter.
So Voiddrinker is definitely the best of the Soul Fragment cards in Warlock. But unfortunately, despite being a like Earth Elemental with no downside, you just don't have enough resources to consistently pull this off, and it's not good enough to force you to run the other Soul Fragment generator cards.
Again, also, is this payoff good enough? I think it's probably one of the best payoffs in Warlock, but I don't know if it's good enough. Next up, we have Spirit Jailer again. I think if you do run Soul Fragments, this is one of the best cards you can run for that deck. It's a really good generator. It's the Aldor Attendant for the build, and it's really good in both classes. It's great in Warlock. A 1 mana 1/3 is fantastic, especially in Zoo sort of matchups if you can maybe find ways to buff this, because it is a demon. But again, you know, you're running a 1 mana 1/3, that's pretty good. You're running a 3 mana 3/4 that deals 3 damage, that's pretty good. But you also have to run a 3 mana deal 2 to all minions. In Zoo, it's not great.
Pretty much exactly correct on that. Like, again, well, There's an exception here. Spirit Jailer actually sees play in Zoo anyway, because the card is just good enough as a 1-mana 1/3 that heals you for 4 delayed. See, Zoo doesn't really exist, but Spirit Jailer does see play in some Warlock decks just to get some heal, and to potentially pay off your Militia. Right. Like, I think some of them do still run Militia. Spirit Jailer is one of those decks. Soul Shear is one of those decks. I think they don't run some of the other payoffs, though, because they're just too weak most of the time anyway. Yeah, Soul Fragments just didn't work in Warlock at all.
Archwitch Willow. I love this card so much. It's a 9-mana legendary minion. It's a 7/7. With the battle cry that summons a random demon from your hand and from your deck. I feel like this won't see standard play right away because we just don't have big demons right now. The biggest demons we have access to are things like Jumbo Imp, and I think there's a couple of other demons we have access to that are quite big. Enhanced Dreadlords. Those are the biggest demons we have in Warlock right now. Those are pretty good pulls off of them, but you have to be running Jumbo Imp in your deck, which is awful. But then again, if you're getting it off of Willow, you're probably quite good. Now, where I think this will see some play is in some versions of Cube Warlock that can probably end up running a 9-mana 7/7. And if big demons are printed in standard, she will likely define any big control Warlock decks that run big demons. And maybe she's good enough just with Enhanced Dreadlords. I think it will take time to see, but she is 9 mana. So you're going to be wanting to get pretty good stuff, and if you whiff on your Dreadlords, then she's going to be a dead card. So you're going to need to run more than just 2 big demons.
So I want to pat myself on the back for this one. Archwitch Willow did end up seeing play in Cube Lock in Wild. She just needed a buff. She went from 9 mana to 8 mana and lost 2/2 in stats, which is probably equivalently fair. The thing holding Willow back a lot was her mana cost for sure. In Wild, she does see a fair amount of play in most versions of Cube Warlock, for just redundancy. Sometimes you don't hit your skull, sometimes your skull gets oozed, and honestly paying 8 mana for potentially 2 demons, or even 1 demon, is usually fine in that deck. So huge props to myself for pointing that out. And I think that Archwitch Willow is actually probably the best Warlock card printed in a long time. Outland has Canrothad. Canrothad is really good, but Willow, I think, will be the cornerstone of Warlock if big demons do get printed, and Control Warlock can capitalize on that, I suppose. I sincerely believe in Archwitch Willow. Whether it's this next expansion or over the next rotation, I expect to see Archwitch Willow picking up some play in Standard because she is just such a great effect. Unfortunately, though, as it stands right now, Enhanced Dreadlords are not enough to carry this card. You need more big, good demons in Standard format.
Next up is Philosophy. We talked about this in Demon Hunter, and I wasn't that thrilled by it there. I am thrilled by it in Warlock. Warlock will really, if you're getting both effects, I'm assuming if you outcast this in Warlock, you're gonna be doing really well. Warlock doesn't run that many demons. They run things like Flame Imps and a couple of other minor demons here and there in Zoo. I think this is a great fit for Zoo. Soul Infusion, the Boomsday card that buffed the left card in your hand by +2/+2, so play. So if this copies like a Flame Imp and then makes it a 4/3 and gives you 2 of them, that's really good. I'm struggling to think of other demons that Zoos run right now, but they do run other demons sometimes, and it'll be good there. Again, even if it just hits a Flame Imp, it's fine. Maybe it will be run with Zoos because that's a decent amount of value and it lets you refill your hands. But we'll see. It just might not hit the critical mass, and it might just get cut because there's other options. Zoo might be just awful because we're not in a meta where Zoo can thrive. We might be in a control meta where Zoo just gets absolutely destroyed and blown out. But I think if Zoo is good, then Warlock can make use of Philosophy for things.
Philosophy are probably one of the weakest cards ever printed. And even if Zoo was good, I actually don't think Philosophy would see play in that deck. Because there's just not enough impact. Zoo needs to be developing minions and needs to be constantly keeping up and generating tempo and controlling the board. And while Philosophy gives you some resources, to get this card to work properly is way too many hoops for a deck like that to actually run through. So Philosophy, terrible, terrible card.
Next up is Flash Giant. It's an 8 mana 8-8 with it's an 8 mana 8-8 epic, and it's insane in Warlock. Your health changes quite a lot in Warlock with things like you have your hero power tapping, you have things like Flame Imps dealing damage to you. You could run Nephicet Thrashers and Diseased Vultures, and run like a self-harm package where this is your finisher, and I think you'd be pretty happy with it. Again, Zoo might just run this because they do run Flame Imps. You know, they tap quite a lot. Maybe this is also a payoff in the Soul Fragments deck, because again, your health changing when you draw a Soul Fragment will count as your health changing for Flash Giants. So that's 2 ways in one turn. If you just tap and you draw a Soul Fragment, that's -2 mana on the Flash Giant. So maybe that's where that goes, and maybe that's why not all of the Warlock payoffs and generators for Soul Fragments are that fantastic, and don't all work well together, because of cards like Flash Giant that are just so insane with them. I think if Soul Fragments do take off and become the best Warlock archetype, I think Flesh Giant will be in that deck, because it is an 8 mana 8-8 that will easily be cheaper than that. And I mean, you're happy to play this for 2 for 3 mana for sure.
So I basically was right on the money, but not in the way I expected. So a self-harm Warlock did come about, but it came about in the wild format, and it was Dark Glare Warlock. And basically the entire deck was built around Dark Glare. You would use Dark Glare to generate mana using Penflingers, using Raised Dead, even Cheeky Ankle Biter was used in that deck to generate mana off of your Dark Glare to eventually be casting huge giants, drawing cards for basically nothing. Like if you put 1 Dark Glare on the board for 3 mana, you could generate, 10, 20, 15 mana worth of stuff in 1 turn. And it was so insane that the wild format actually had to nerf a standard card, just for the wild format, which I don't think has ever happened before. So just an insane card. Flesh Giant really, really pushing Dark Glare Warlock over the edge, for sure. Yeah, just nutty. I do expect that it probably will pick up and see some play in potential Zoo decks if that picks up in Standard over the next expansion. Although I highly doubt it, because the next expansion seems to be incredibly slow, and the focus seems to be much more on old gods and, bigger, slower decks. So I don't expect Zoo will take off anytime soon. But who knows? Flesh Giant, another one to keep your eye on in the future.
Next is Disciplinarian Gandling. Now this in Warlock is also great, because Warlock has a lot of ways to generate things like lackeys, and they're already willing to destroy their minions. I could see Zoo moving more out of like the demon, like tempo-y packages, and moving more into what they had before, where they have things like eggs, they run lackeys, and your value comes from things like Gandling and destroying your own minions and whatnot, rather than, demon sort of builds and stuff like that. I really like Gandling in Zoo. There are a lot of small minions. You have like a Beaming Sidekick, for example. Perfect minion to turn into a failed student with Gandling. Any lackeys. The 2/2 Evil Genius is also great. Eggs, Terran Gorefiend, can just calm down, clean everything up, get destroyed. Would that even work? I don't know. I'm not even thinking about that.
It doesn't work.
But I could see that becoming a deck with like a Zoo deck that's running, that uses Gandling as a tool. You could use things like Takan, right? Where even if you don't have Gandling, your lackeys can still be 4/4 minions with their effects. So yeah, I see Gandling being quite good in Warlock.
So Gandling turns out to be one of the worst legendary cards in the set. Do I think one of the worst legendaries ever printed? No, absolutely not. I think Gandling is actually insane. And there are some high legend Zoo Warlock decks that do use like heal packages and Gandling, because their curves are really low, and summoning a 4/4 for 1 mana is that good. I do think that Gandling has so much potential in Warlock, and again, if Zoo gets support, Gandling will be in Zoo, I think. There's almost no doubt in my mind. Come rotation, maybe. I don't know though, because lackeys are really good with Gandling. It really just depends on what support gets printed for a Zoo Warlock deck. But unfortunately, Gandling, as part of like a general populist thing, not strong enough to push Zoo, and in fact, Zoo is probably the worst it's ever been. Pretty much a garbage card, and has seen essentially 0 play.
Next up, we have Boneweb Egg. Again, a card fantastic with Gandling and fantastic with Evil Genius. It's a great egg. I feel like the discard synergy in Standard won't matter. There's just not that much discard in the format, and the discard that is in the format is mostly for big stuff, things like Expired Merchant, things like Nightshade Matron, for example. You're not going to be hitting Boneweb Egg most of the time to get the effect, but it's still fine as an egg itself. Because of things like Gandling, Evil Genius, etc., etc., and I think it will see play. I think that's where Zoo is going to go, towards more of an egg-based direction, using Gandling, maybe using the Soul Fragment cards even. I'm not entirely sure, maybe not, because that's a lot of conflict, but who knows, maybe they will. Maybe it'll just be like Soul Fragment Zoo, they run things like the Flash Giant, they run the eggs, they run Gandling, they run Takan, and that's just your build, right? Maybe that's just how Zoo goes this expansion. Again, not a lot of stuff for Control Warlock.
So yeah, Boneweb Egg has seen basically no play in Zoo, and Zoo didn't see any play. Discard Synergy didn't end up mattering. This card doesn't even see play in Wild Zoo Warlock, because it's not good enough. I think we are getting some discard synergy in the upcoming expansion, so perhaps Boneweb Egg, because it's targeted for the lowest. So with Boneweb Egg in the right circumstances, it will be insane. Overall, though, I don't see it. In fact, Boneweb Egg's really like only time in the spotlight has been in the duels format with Archwitch Willow's hero power. But Archwitch Willow, notably the worst hero in duels by quite a lot. So even a direct discard from a hero power is not good enough to make this card see play.
And then we have Brittle Bone Destroyer, of course. Again, notably much better in Warlock than it is in Priest. Because again, you have multiple ways to trigger this, especially if you're running Soul Fragments. You just draw a Soul Fragment, then this becomes active for a turn. And it's quite good, especially in a metagame again, where we have evasive minions. We have minions that can't be targeted by spells. So minion removal is actually at an all-time high right now. Things like the 7-mana 7/7 dragon that can come down, the evasive Fey Wings, your fairy dragons, etc., etc. All of which are seeing play in top-tier hunter decks right now. Being able to remove those with ease is definitely going to be helpful.
So yeah, evasive minions don't see much play at all, and Warlock has better removal than Brittle Bone Destroyer, essentially.
Alright, that's all the Warlock cards. Let's move to Warrior and then to Neutral.
I played a lot of Warrior this expansion. So yeah, this will be a fun rating to go through. I was really excited about Warrior.
Okay, so Warrior has Athletic Studies. It's a I don't know how I feel about this one. Rush minions are pretty good to discount and are pretty good to get, especially since Warrior does have a nice rush theme going on in this expansion. They have a lot of rush payoffs. They have just strong rush cards, rush build-arounds, and this is good for that. Like, this can discount your Kargath, your Restless Mummies, even your Dr. Krastinovs if you feel so inclined. It can also give you all of those cards. Like, getting a second copy of Kargath off of this is quite nice. And I feel like that's where it will see... Like, it might see play some there, but maybe not. I mean, it doesn't fit into Tempo Warrior right now. Maybe a Rush Warrior will start to come around because of a card like this, and they just have the resources for that. But I feel like my brain tells me that it will be tempo-based Warrior decks that are going to be playing around right now. Maybe Highlander decks for Warrior as well, and if that's the case, you have Athletic Studies in that deck. But otherwise, no, I don't see this card being played.
So Athletic Studies is a key card in the Tier 3, Tier 4 deck of Big Warrior. Getting a minion early is really, really impactful and important, and Athletic Studies sees a lot of play in that list, even though it's not super competitive. In the future, I actually expect Athletic Studies to pick up a lot of play as Rush minions are getting a big push in Warrior with the next expansion, with one of their legendaries being an insane Rush payoff. So definitely keep an eye out for any Rush Tribal and any Rush Synergy. Athletic Studies actually not a bad studies, probably one of the top 5 best in the set.
Outside of that. Next up we have Information. It's a 2-mana common spell that adds 2 random taunt minions to your hand. Random taunt minions are probably not that great, even for 2 mana. Again, you have things like I Know a Guy, which was Discover a taunt minion for 1 mana that didn't see play. And there are a lot of garbage taunt minions in Hearthstone. You have things like Silverback Patriarch, for example, or, you know, Syndion Shieldmaster. You know, there are chances where this is just not going to hit the things you need with it. It might be good in Highlander decks because it's just extra resources. I just don't see this being played.
Played a lot of Quest Warrior over the last few expansions, and towards the end of Outland. And that deck I thought was actually semi-competitive in a Quest Mage dominated meta, because a lot of taunt minions, it turns out, were really difficult for Quest Mages to get through. Information, completely useless in that deck. They did not need, they needed good card draw, for sure, but not random taunt minions. Just was not necessary for them whatsoever. Saw zero play. One of the worst cards in the set, I think.
Cutting class, again, we saw this for Rogue, we see it in Warrior, and as I was saying during the Rogue, I'm going to elaborate now, this is quite good in Warrior. You have a lot of decent weapons there. You have, like, the Reaper Scythe we're going to see coming up. In Bomb Warrior, you have Wrench Calibers, you have Live Wire Lancers, maybe, and you have Ankar. All of those are discounting this by at least 2, and then you have Dr. Krasinov, which you have access to in Warrior, which will actually probably see a lot of play, because a lot of Warrior weapons are worth buffing. You have things like Upgrade as well. Warrior tends to use their weapons a lot more than Rogue does, because Rogue has almost a disposable feel to their weapons, because you have the hero power. You're constantly hero powering to get a new weapon.
Extremely true.
You're not building durability on each of your weapons. You're always just buffing the attack with things like Deadly Poison and the new Volpera card, for example, whereas Warrior tends to make more longevity-based plays with their weapons. This notably quite good with Gorehowl if you want to run it with Gorehowl, but I don't know if Gorehowl would see play, like would fit into that sort of tempo-y list. And I don't know if Warrior wants this kind of card draw. Again, if you pay 3 mana for this, which you probably will most of the time because most of your weapons are 2 attack and above, it feels pretty good. But you have things like Battle Rage, which draw you way more cards for 2 mana, or about 2 mana. So you get to usually get way more than 2 cards for Battle Rage with things like Risky Skipper Turns. So yeah, I don't see this fitting in right now. I had trouble fitting it in when I was building Warrior decks, and it was just easier to run Battle Rage instead.
So, I guess the big takeaway from Warrior reveals and my review of Warrior cards was that we had just come through from 3 months of Warrior and Demon Hunter basically being the only playable classes and the best 2 decks in the format. Demon Hunter being the like hyper-aggressive, crazy deck, and Tempo Warrior keeping them in line. And I would have loved to have called Bomb Warrior as the big deck that took over the format because of Tempo Mage and Guardian Druid, and Bomb Warrior completely shat on both of those decks, which I kind of alluded to a little bit with the mention of Wrench Caliber and whatnot. But unfortunately, I was very convinced that you would not need Cutting Class because you'd be running things like Ankar, and you would be using Battle Rage because Tempo Warrior would still be insane. It turned out that Tempo Warrior was absolutely garbage against the rest of this meta, because it can't beat Guardian Animals. The minions are just too large for your board swings, and I know I tried to play a lot of Tempo Warrior this expansion. I gave up and ended up just playing Bomb Warrior instead, which I thought was insane, and I am shocked that Bomb Warrior has not been nerfed. And part of that is because of the consistency of Cutting Class. Equipping a Wrench Caliber, which you have an easy way to 2-4 in Corsair Cash, which I also called as being a 5-star insane card, Cutting Class is the perfect amount of draw in that deck, alongside things like Galakron.
Next up we have Commencement. We talked about this a lot for Paladin, and I think the same applies for Warrior. Sure, you could build your deck around this. You run like a big Warrior with like the Boom Ripper or whatever it is, and stuff like that. But no, I don't see it. I tried playing Big Warrior a lot. Big Warrior was a deck around kobolds that I was super enamored with. Even if we are going to go into a control-based meta, there's no way to guarantee that this will hit the thing you want it to hit, and your minions will probably be likely pretty low pools. And if you're not putting giant minions in your deck, you're only putting like medium to, if you have anything from medium to big minions. This hits a medium minion. You're paying 7 mana for maybe a 3 or a 4 cost card that gets Taunt and Divine Shield. That sucks. It's really not that good. I just don't think this is a card that will currently fit into any existing archetypes, and it's not even good in a wild deck that basically wants to do the exact thing.
I am shocked that looking at Commencement didn't immediately make me go, this Guardian Animals card is actually insane. Like, this recruits 1 minion from your deck and gives it Taunt and Divine Shield. If that hits like a 9 or 10 cost, that's pretty insane. But I mean, at a baseline, as long as you have 5 cost beasts in your deck, Guardian Animals was always nuts. So I am really, really upset with myself for not seeing Guardian Animals. Big Warrior ended up being one of the fun decks in this expansion, where it wasn't insanely competitive, but it was experimented with enough in lower tiers and saw a decent amount of play, like No Minion Mage beforehand, like Quest Rogue from Uldum. It's just one of those decks where it has enough support and it is just competitive enough, but it is mostly just a deck for fun, and if you come against it, you know that your opponent is mostly having fun. Commencement is a decent card, and I think that with enough support, big decks might be able to be viable in Wild. It's just that right now, Warrior does not have enough tools to make a big deck work the way Priest does, right? The thing that made Big Priest so good was that not only could you cheat minions into play really easily, but you could continually resummon those same minions that you did cheat into play. Whereas with Warrior, you're paying 7 mana to summon a minion from your deck. It's not a copy of a minion, it is the minion. And then if it gets removed somehow, you kind of just did nothing, right? So that's a huge weakness in the deck. Whereas Big Priest, removing the minion some of the time was actually the worst thing you could do. Because resurrecting the minion was actually so much more tempo, because resurrect effects were usually cheaper than the summoning effects. Although in Priest you could summon things for 6 mana and get a 5/5 copy, which is like insane.
Next we have Coerce again, which we've seen for Rogue. It's a 3 mana rare spell. Destroy a damaged minion and combos destroy any minion. This is actually quite good in Warrior. If they can do any way to combo this, they get a hard removal tool. They already did have Execute, but Execute hasn't been run for ages in a meta where damaged minions are really common. Warrior is much more board based in the form of their removal these days, board and weapon based, and I think Coerce probably doesn't fit into that, because you have to pay 3 mana for this card by itself, and you have to combo it somehow. Warrior doesn't really run any 0 mana spells or cards.
The thing I didn't see was that Bomb Warrior wasn't running very many minions, and they just wanted removal, because their whole win condition was to hit you in the face with their Wrench Caliber, shuffle bombs into your deck, and then kill you with the inevitability. And Coerce was really good in that deck, because it just allowed you to unconditionally kill pretty much whatever your opponent had. Especially through Brawl, right? Like turn 8, a common line that warriors would do is they would brawl, and whichever minion survived, if it was your opponent's one, just got coerced. And so essentially you paid 2 cards for a Twisting Nether in Warrior, which was really insane.
Next up we have Shield of Honor. Now this is going to be nutty. We talked about this with Paladin. It's a 1 mana common spell that give a damage minion +3 attack and Divine Shield. I said in Paladin they wouldn't have much ways to use this because they don't have many ways to damage their minions. The opposite is true for Warrior, and in fact this is so good that it probably just makes Tempo Warrior great again. Hitting a Warmail Challenger is absolutely nuts, and it's probably going to end up making Tempo Warrior tier 1 again. Again, you have risky skippers. You can run Inner Rages. This hits like eggs. It can hit like Armor Smiths even to protect them for longer periods. Again, you can pair this with Bloodsworn Mercenary, so you can give a minion Divine Shield, then copy the damaged minion with a Divine Shield, and you get 2 of them. Like, this is absolutely nuts in Warrior, and I can't wait for this to slot into Tempo Warriors and really piss everybody off.
So it turns out Tempo Warrior didn't see play, even though Shield of Honor is batshit, right? Like, this card is insane, and if they had access to Shield of Honor in Outland, Tempo Warrior would have been completely obliterated way earlier in the meta than it was. Yeah, this card is insane on paper. It just didn't line up with the metagame. Tempo Warrior just didn't actually end up beating anything anymore because card decks were adapted and got better tools. Mage, in particular, could easily handle Tempo Warrior. Guardian Druid can handle Tempo Warrior. You do have a great matchup against Demon Hunter still, so I imagine that Tempo Warrior is actually decent, given that Mage has been nerfed now. Hasn't been experimented with too much. I think that they are running, I think Tempo Warrior does kind of exist right now, but they've gone away from the tempo sort of aspect and have focused much more on a OTK style of play. And Shield of Honor is actually used in that OTK. You use the 4/3 with charge, you Inner Rage, Shield of Honor, you play like Bloodsworn Mercenaries, etc. And you can deal upwards of 20 odd damage with it. That being said, that's a really niche deck. I do expect that Shield of Honor will see play at some point if Tempo Warrior is to come back. This is the last chance it has because Risky Skipper will soon be rotating out of the it will be rotating out next expansion. But again, only time will tell.
Next up, we have Reaper Scythe as a new weapon for Warrior. It's a 4 mana rare weapon. It's 4/2. With a spell burst that also damages adjacent minions this turn. I had to laugh when I saw this because Scourgelord Garrosh is rolling in his grave. Like, the only reason Scourgelord Garrosh saw play was basically because he could do the cleave effect on a
because Shadow Moon was so insane.
Weapon. Admittedly, it's still quite good, but this is also fantastic considering how much cheaper it is. Again, as I said before, spell burst weapons are the best spell bursts to get because weapons are going to be the hardest to remove and stop the spell bursts from happening because you have to run exactly Ooze or Harrison Jones. Unless we're in a weapon-based meta, which we have been for a bit, there won't be too many weapons around, and I imagine early on in the expansion there won't be too many weapons. Reaper Scythe notably also good with cutting class because it makes it 1 mana. There's just so many good applications for this, and having 4 attack is great. Can be really good off of Corsair Cash, for example. And the cleave effect is really nice, even though there isn't too many spells in Warrior. I mean, you'll definitely be running Shield of Honor in Tempo Warrior, for example, and I think this is great in Tempo Warrior as well. Helps you clear the board so your minions can go face.
So yeah, Reaper Scythe actually did see some play in some Control Warrior. Not a great pick. It's kind of a niche pick in some of those lists because it competed with your Wrench Caliber and Bomb Warrior, which was by far the most common Warrior deck played. We were not in an Ooze meta. The only classes that ran Ooze were mostly Highlander decks that wanted flex spots because, well, I mean, having tech is kind of nice in those lists because you have the flexibility to have tech, and it's not... Running Ooze isn't too bad in those lists, right? 2 mana 2/3 is not awful when you're a slower control deck. The thing is, it took like 2 months for us to come into an Ooze meta. It took Bomb Warrior to be the height of the meta. Guardian Druid before it got nerfed. Tempo Mage being dominant. Basically forced a lot of control decks, Priest in particular, to really start to amp up their Ooze. And now I think most control decks, or hard control decks, run Ooze, Control Warrior included. Reaper Scythe suffers a little bit because of that. But also, like, you know, they run things like Bulwark of Azzinoth in that deck too to eat the Oozes. They run Horde, Pillagers. Ooze was not the greatest against Bomb Warrior either. So, again, it's just a little bit of awkwardness, I think, around weapons. But we did end up getting an Ooze meta, and that kind of weakens the Reaper Scythe. Reaper Scythe didn't end up seeing as much play as I anticipated because obviously Tempo Warrior didn't see as much play as I anticipated. But it did still see a little bit of play in Control Warrior.
Next up we have Lord Barrow. Again, it's a 3 mana legendary minion. It's a 3/2 with a battle cry that sets the health of all of the minions to 1, and the death rather damages deal 1 damage to all minions. This plus Risky Skipper clears the board, straight up. Warrior can use this so much better than Paladin can, and they really love the equality effect because of exactly things like Risky Skipper. They have things like Whirlwind available to them anyway.
I think Lord Barrow, unironically, is probably the second best card in the set. Lord Barrow saw playing Paladin towards the end because of how efficient it is at clearing the board. It is just that good. Warrior, you had exactly Risky Skipper in Tempo decks, even though Tempo Warrior didn't see much play. I have seen Risky Skipper plus Barrow played in Control Warrior. Barrow sees play in every Warrior deck. Every single one. Except Big Warrior, of course. But again, Big Warrior is not that competitive. It sees play in Control Warrior, it sees play in Bomb Warrior. You have so many ways to capitalize. You have Whirlwinds, you have Sword and Board. You can Sword and Board your Barrow. That helps you clear the board. Risky Skipper, again, is another way. Barrow, just an insane card. I saw a ton of play.
Dr. Krasinov is back again. It's a 5 mana legendary minion, 4/4 with Rush, and when it attacks you give you a weapon +1/+1. Again, I see this in Warrior much better than Rogue. Warrior cares much more about durability than Rogue does because Warrior wants to keep their weapons to keep pressuring face, whereas Rogue can always equip a new weapon and keep going face with that. Again, Rogue has never had a focus on durability, Warrior has, but I still don't think that means that weapon-based Warrior decks are going to take off. I feel like if Krasinov does see play, it'll be alongside other cards in Tempo Warrior just to keep your weapons going, to keep pressuring face damage over and over again. Chances are Krasinov will get removed most of the time, but he's not a pirate, which means he can't be pulled by Anchor, which does suck for him a little bit too, over Greenskin. But it is a card you have to respect, because otherwise it will just keep buffing your weapon, and in Warrior that probably means you will just die. I currently don't have in my Tempo Warrior lists that I've built that I'm going to try out. Maybe I will, because he'll be so essential for keeping weapons buffed, but at this stage I actually don't know.
So it turns out that a weapon-based warrior deck actually did take off. It was Bomb Warrior, and Krasinov is one of the best cards in that deck because it's basically an upgrade on a stick. It is also better than Greenskin for the exact reason why I said it. Because you don't draw it off of your Ankar makes it insane. Because you don't necessarily want to be drawing Krasinov if you're playing Ankar. You want to be drawing your risky skippers in Tempo Warrior so that you can, clear the board and generate tons of armor. Krasinov, insane card, as I've said before, and definitely one of the best legendaries in the set because of its presence in Bomb Warrior, in Weapon Rogue, in Control Warrior it sees play as well. Krasinov is actually fantastic. Much better than Greenskin, as it turns out.
Next we have Playmaker. It's a 3 mana epic minion. It's a 4/3, and after you play a rush minion, summon a copy with 1 health remaining. This is great with Restless Mummy. It's great with Kargath Blade Fist. It's great with most rush minions that currently exist in the format. And I think it might see some play in Tempo Warrior. I don't have it in my current build right now. Maybe as a one-of in Highlander Warrior decks too. Because of Kargath's, Kargath kind of sucks with it in Highlander Warrior because you have 2 primes in your deck, but 2 primes is pretty good. It's exceptional with Restless Mummy. Maybe Galakron Warrior will run this. Again, I'm actually thinking about Galakron Warrior. Maybe Cutting Class will see play in that deck too. Galakron Warrior might come back now that they have a little bit of extra card draw. Man, losing Acolyte of Pain was bad for that deck, but I don't know. Playmaker though, great rush card. Great rush payoff. Has to be removed immediately, which will be nice. Soft Taunt is really effective on cards like having Soft Taunt lets you protect other minions quite well. Yeah, and this again, it's just so insane to the point where I think you might even hold it to play with Restless Mummy, like Greed, play that.
So Playmaker actually saw basically no play as of this expansion because Rush Warrior just didn't need it, and Galakron Warrior actually ended up just being Bomb Warrior, and they only used Galakron to draw Horde Pillagers, Lord Barrows, Kronks, or the Krastinovs. They basically just used the Galakron to gain a little bit of armor and to pressure your opponent with the inevitability of your Galakron hero power. Dealing 3 damage a turn is actually really nuts. Yeah, Playmaker I think will be one to watch though, as again, Rush Warrior is getting a lot of support in the next expansion with ETC, and Playmaker plus ETC is only 5 mana. Playmaker again, still good with Restless Mummy, which will if you're going to be running a Rush tribal deck, you will see Restless Mummy, you will see Kargath, etc. I think Rush Warrior might actually take off. I really do. There's a critical mass of great Rush cards already in the set, so who knows where that'll go. Ceremonial Mall. We've seen this card before. Paladin. It's a 3 mana epic weapon. It's a 2/2 and a spell burst. Summon a student with taunt and stats equal to the spell's cost. Again, Warrior is not running too many big spells. I think the biggest spell they run these days in most lists is like Brawl, for example. And you don't want to be casting Brawl and then, oh, actually, yes, you do, because the spell burst will resolve after the Brawl happens. So you get a 5/5 after that. Again, this does have the upside of being a weapon. Weapon spell bursts, again, hardest ones to remove because of oozes. There's only one type of card that can stop them. But then again, this isn't that strong. Yeah, Ceremonial Mall, like a lot of epics in Scholomance, I'm now realizing, is one of those Feast or Famine epics. It just saw no play whatsoever, and it was terrible. Just absolutely terrible card.
Next up is Steel Dancer again. We saw this in Rogue. 4 mana 4/4, and it summons a random minion with cost equal to your weapon's attack. Again, you need a weapon to have at least 4 attack, which I guess you do with Warrior because you have like the Reaper Scythe, for example. But again, Warrior does not typically have... Again, Warrior cares more about durability buffs. They do go for attack buffs as well, but they don't have the burst buff potential that Rogue has. They don't have access to the Volpera Tox whatever, the Volpera from this set that buffs your weapon by +2 attack. They don't have things like Deadly Poisons, which would make this better. They only have Upgrade, they have Dr. Krasinov, and they have Greenskin. They care more about buffing both attack and durability. They don't care so much about pure attack. They want their weapons to be consistent. Again, you need to hit a 4-drop off of this for it to feel okay. It would have to be a good 4-drop too. And I just feel like that's not feasible enough, often enough, to want to run this in your deck. Like, even if you are running weapons, you're probably not really wanting to run a 4 mana 4/4 that can sometimes summon another 4 mana 4/4. You know what I mean? It's just not that strong.
Steel Dancer was just not needed in Warrior. They didn't need the pressure of minions. They had better pressure in their removal and bombs. Just straight up. This may as well just be a rogue card. It shouldn't even be a warrior card, honestly. Like, it just it's not even necessary in warrior at all.
Next up is Troublemaker. It's an 8 mana rare minion. It's a 6/8, and at the end of your turn, you summon 2 3/3 ruffians that attack random enemies. This is really good. As we've seen from recent effects like the Grand Slam, like Imprisoned Felmore, like Priestess of Fury, having consistent damage at the end of the turn is random damage like that is really good. This has to be removed immediately. It's beefy health. It's basically the same as Priestess of Fury, except it's actually better, arguably, because you get to keep the minions. The 6 damage it does at the end of every turn is like a permanent minion you get to keep on the board, which is really nice. Although admittedly a little bit more awkward because it does the damages in 3 bursts, so killing a 5-drop and dealing 1 damage to a 1-drop is not going to happen. But again, you do get to keep the minions. I think this card is really nuts and might be the end or be all card. That might be the top of the curve in tempo decks. You might see a one-of in Highlander decks. Maybe mid-range style warrior decks will rise up, and this is a card at the top of those curves as well. And it's just like such an oppressive card that it ends up making the deck insane.
There are a couple of things about Troublemaker that I want to note. The first of which is how important of a distinction 1 mana difference is. Priestess of Fury, on paper, seems infinitely worse than this card. Priestess of Fury, at the height of its strength, saw infinitely more play than Troublemaker. It was played in basically every competitive Demon Hunter deck because it was just unbelievably strong at 7 mana. Coming down on 7, or sometimes on turn 5 with enough work, which you could do in Demon Hunter, was backbreaking. When you also consider the second point, which is that Demon Hunters were had so much pressure they could generate between the start of the game and the time they played their Priestess of Fury, to the point where the Priestess of Fury would often end up being lethal for your opponent, right? Whereas Troublemaker just isn't in a class that has the same kind of thing, right? Like, the only aggressive warrior deck we've ever seen is Pirate Warrior. And Pirate Warrior admittedly fills that same void, but Pirate Warrior caps out at about turn 5. And if you're not winning the game by that point, you've lost. And Troublemaker doesn't help you with that because it is 8 mana. And while it is infinitely better than Priestess of Fury, Warrior just doesn't have the pressure. Even in Tempo Warrior, where I imagine this card being insane, you just don't pressure your opponent in the same way. You pressure your opponent by having answers, removing their board, gaining a ton of armor. And Troublemaker is great in that situation, but it's great because it shits on control decks, right? Which is not really the same thing as Priestess of Fury. What I will say, though, is that the reason why Recruit/Big Warrior in Standard right now is not just a garbage complete mid deck and is in actually Tier 3/Tier 4, is actually on the back of Troublemaker, because it's one of the best things you can recruit in that deck. And it also sees a lot of playing Control Warrior. Don't take a lot of my negative criticism and comparisons here as the Troublemaker is a bad card and didn't have a lot of impact. Sometimes Troublemaker was so good that you would just like win on the spot because your opponent didn't have a way to answer it, and it would just spiral into a out of control against control decks, and they just make them cry. I expect Troublemaker will see some play in the upcoming meta if it slows down enough, because it is insane and it demands removal. So yeah, definitely watch out for this one. I think it's really, really good. I mean, I expect Control Warrior to actually pick up quite a bit in the upcoming meta, so.
And finally for Warrior, we have Rattle Gore. It is a 9 mana legendary. It's a 9/9 with a death rattle that summons it with -1/-1. And it will keep doing that. So if it's an 8/8, it will resummon as a 7/7, as a 7/7, as a 6/6, etc., etc. There isn't too much silence in the set. The only silences we have available in the format generally are Ironbeak Owl, Mage Hunter, the Demon Hunter silence, and then we have transform effects. So we have things like Polymorph, we have Devolving Missiles, and we have Hex. All of those cards completely blow this card out, and on top of that, when you play this on turn 9, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't have fast stats. It doesn't have Rush or Taunt or anything like that, but it does sort of need to be removed immediately. If you don't remove this card, it will take favorable trades until you don't want to trade with it anymore and you just want to use it as a beat stick to kill your opponent with. And again, if your opponent doesn't have transform effects or, saps, for example, then you're probably in a bad state. I think these are also coded as separate minions. So sap would actually be fine against this because it's not going to put it back to your hand as a 9/9. If it's a 6/6, it'll put it back as a 6/6, I think. I'm not entirely sure. I think this is too slow, and I think that this is probably the kind of thing you want to cheat out with commencement, for example. But again, that's just not worth doing. I think it's too slow. I really love the card, and I want to try it out, and we'll probably throw it in some warrior decks now and then. But I don't think it's going to help your overall win rate to include Rattle Gore in your deck. Maybe in Recruit Warrior and Wild. But again, Rattle Gore... Recruit Warrior and Wild is a complete meme.
So, Rattle Gore actually was a really decent card. It helps Control Warrior win long, control-y, grindy matchups, because despite the fact that you lose a lot of value on this if it gets silenced, it is still a gigantic minion that you are forced to silence. Admittedly, it does lose quite hard to Polymorph, Hex, and Devolving Missiles, and in fact, part of the reason why all three of those, well, not Hex so much, but the reason why Polymorph and especially Devolving Missiles are so valuable is because in slower control matchups against Big Warrior and Control Warrior, Rattle Gore just ends games on his own. And even if you silence it in Priest, right, like Priest did run some silences, even if you silence Rattle Gore, this is still a 9/9 beater that is going to kill you eventually, right? Like, you have to silence it and remove it at the same time. And some decks just couldn't handle that. They couldn't do it. Mage in particular would often lose games. Like, Highlander Mage is suffering a lot right now because Rattle Gore exists, because they can't hold their resources for long enough to be able to deal with a Rattle Gore, deal with Troublemaker, deal with like Scrapyard Colossus, right? So Rattle Gore is just one of those cards where, because there's a lot of other cards that force silences and force removal, he ends up being an extremely potent card in control decks, in Control Warrior, in Big Warrior, and is definitely enough of a threat just by existing. Like, this is the kind of card where, even though it's not fast stats, and it is kind of a tempo loss to play a 9-mana 9/9, it's a 9-mana 9/9 that scares your opponent and almost forces them to react to it, unless they're going to kill you. It's surprising to me that a card that is... it is actually just that difficult to remove, which is shocking. It's genuinely shocking. I expect Rattle Gore will see more play in the future, if the meta will slow down. And will likely be one of the best cards in Warrior in sort of a control matchup, for sure. Rattle Gore, surprising a lot of people, I think, in its versatility in control decks.
Now we're moving on to the neutral cards, and we're almost done.